All right, guys. This is from Reddit. This says, I've been serving as a youth pastor at my church for the past year and a half. While I love students and the congregation, I have conflicted with the leadership for the past 7 months, a situation I don't want to share on the internet, and things have only been worsening. Last month, the executive pastor, not the senior pastor, told me he felt that I wasn't a fit for their church, and I agreed. He has not told the lead pastor about our conversation yet, but now I feel guilty about leaving. I have sought counsel from other pastors outside of our community, and they all think I should leave. But when I read articles about leaving, they all talk about toughing it out. I've tried to resolve this conflict multiple times, but every time it just worsens. What do I do? Before anyone talks, practically pastor will not tell you to tough it out. You should just leave. Our response almost to all these type of questions is like, get out of there, dude. Like, run away, update your resume on Canva, and jet out of there. But I mean, like, I think this is all very contextual.
Call Matt Steen.
Hey,
honestly, we love chemistry staffing. We should really work out some kind of a sponsorship deal because we talk about chemistry staffing
almost like every other episode,
all the time,
and also like offline.
Our group chat is always like, "Ooh, that guy needs to call Matt Steen."
Literally, we just talked about that like a couple days ago. Yeah, brother. Like, man, if you already have a conversation with someone who's in authority above you, that they don't think you're a good fit, and you've agreed to this, get out of there. Like,
I mean, the executive pastor
no
ain't leaving. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's going to be you, buddy. And you'd much rather resign or get called somewhere else than get fired.
You know, and you might be feeling that tension because you literally have been there for a year and a half, and the statistics is like 18 months is the average youth pastor. I get it. I get you don't want to be a statistic. But like if you're married, your marriage, your family, your own health is more important than not being a statistic in this situation. Does that make sense?
The reason why that's a statistic is because 18 months is right about 3 or 4 months after the honeymoon ended of you being on staff there.
That's true.
Everything was great.
Or
Everyone was on there.
7 months after in this situation.
Yeah, exactly. It's like about a year in is when you're not the new guy anymore. You're just there, and all the normal real stuff starts to really, all the things that you in your interview were like, it's probably not going to be that bad. They start really grinding on you, especially if that's like, leadership issues or philosophy of ministry issues. That's when it starts to really bother you, and or you bother other people under your leadership, and people are not giving you a chance anymore as the new guy. You're just on staff now. So that's why that stat, I think that's a big reason why that stat is that length of time.
But
another reason that stat exists is because you have people that want to be in charge and cannot sit under the authority that God has placed over them or that they have willingly placed over themselves. When you got hired at this church, the leadership structure was already intact. I'm assuming that executive pastor was there, and I'm assuming that senior pastor was there. And so you willfully placed yourself under their authority. Not every situation do you get to choose who is in authority over you, but in this situation you did. And if you can no longer sit under their authority, you can't be there. That's what it is. It's either you submit to the authority that God has in place at that church, or you leave that church, because you don't get to change what the authority is that's already been established.
You know, I think one of the things Jeff was hitting on was pretty right. That's actually where I was. Some of the reason there's an 18-month turnover on student pastors is because student pastors run out of their old sermons, and they don't, they've had all the intro conversations with the students.
That's funny.
But some of it's because it's on the church. The average American church has wired its own self so that it can only keep a student pastor for 18 months. And that's a sad conversation. And if you're set on going, okay, well, then you're set on going. But I'm always a fan of, hey, church discipline and working through conflict specifically. There's a lot of opportunity for growth there. Like if there's some big things that you've talked to this important person about, the executive pastor, if y'all are on good terms, I mean, because we don't have any of the context of how he told you he didn't think you were fit. Was that aggressively? Sometimes executive pastors, man, I hope he's not like this. Sometimes they can be a little like manipulative and try to like gaslight you into thinking something. I would try to have another conversation with him and say, hey, you said you didn't think I was called this. Can you give me some specific examples why? Not so you could get beat up, but for a growth opportunity for you. And because a great way to absolve guilt is to give it everything you got before you leave. If you're like, I exhausted this pipeline, I went to this conversation, I had this conversation, I did these things, and then I left, the guilt, it's not going to be on you because you tried to do it. You tried to reform yourself or either the context of what you're going on. So I would just encourage you. My biggest encouragement is before you just jet and leave, for your own conscience, for your own, everything, lean into it one good time so you can know, hey, I did try to do this.
I would say you've done a lot of good things, maybe in the right order. Some difficult conversations. You've tried to resolve the conflict. You sought outside counsel. I mean, these are things I would have done, and probably in that order. And then you had the conversation with the executive pastor, and you said you both agreed, not a good fit. I'm sorry about the guilt. I don't think the guilt is a bad thing. I think you could maybe reframe that a little bit. The guilt might be because you love your students in your congregation. That's a good thing. Like, you should care about your students in your congregation. But I would also see this as an opportunity to care for them even further, because the next guy that God has in store for this ministry might be an even better fit, and you kind of paved the way for that. So this could be a really sweet opportunity for you. I think there's a lot of good advice here. I do think a conversation would need to be had with the lead pastor. He should not be in the dark through this whole thing at all. And it sounds like you're already praying through next steps and what that could look like. Having a plan in place would probably be really, really wise at this stage in the game as well. So I think you're working through the right steps. Sorry, it's such a tough season. I will say we've all been through tough seasons. We would never say tough it out. I think we're going to go through periods where it's going to be harder than other times, for sure. And yeah, we will have to withstand some of those challenges. But when it comes to this point, and you've already had these really difficult conversations, and to me, like, the agreement that this is not a good fit between you and the executive pastor, that kind of seals it in my mind. And I could be wrong there, but it sounds like you guys are both on the same page.
I think you are coming up to a very precarious point of the calendar. It is the middle of March when this episode is airing, which means that you've got spring break probably starting in about a week or so, and then you've got a sprint to the end of the school year, and then it's summer. And in youth ministry, churches need to have their youth ministry staff in place over the summer. So maybe what this is you say to the senior pastor, the elders, the executive pastor, hey, I realize that I am not a long-term fit. Here's what we have planned. You don't have the next person in line. I don't have the next thing lined up. I understand that it's probably not healthy for me to be here long term. Can we get through the summer? Can we get the kids to camp? Can we go on the mission trip? And then I will transition off without making a big fuss and without making a big noise, and try to paint the church in the best light as I'm leaving. But
dude,
then,
as a lead pastor, that would mean so much to me.
But then you will not
that healthy timeline.
But you will also then not be in the lurch by the executive pastor having to take kids to camp where everybody has a bad time.
I love that.
So,
but also
maybe that's the
church, just
conversation
understand
we
I
need
might need to go do an interview or two.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
during
give,
that time.
give me the freedom, because hopefully August 1st I'm starting somewhere else. And also, if that's not the case, remember that I'm doing this for you, and there might need to be a couple months of severance as a bridge to make that happen, because I could have jumped in when another church wanted me to start June 1st so I could take their kids to camp and go on that mission trip.
Yeah, or I could
because-
just not tell you I'm interviewing somewhere and this, hey, by the way, this is 2 weeks notice.
Also,
which is way
there's a good
short for a
chance
church.
that if you are trying to do it the right way, you might go to the elders and say, here's the plan. And they say, no, we don't want someone who's got one foot out the door. See ya. So
That's okay too.
there's that risk as well. And if that's the case, I would say trust that God is faithful and that He is sovereign. Do what you can do and what you think you should do. But if you can no longer submit to the authority that God has placed over you, you need to start looking for the exit strategy.
And I would say too, if all of that sounds overwhelming, just in your mind decide I'm just going to do the next right thing. That's all
good.
you got to just
Frozen 2, baby.
Yeah, what's the next right
Wasn't that
thing
good?
for me to do? I didn't even know that was a
Yeah,
reference.
but that song was a banger.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
from Frozen 2. But
Okay.
but
Well,
even
anyway.
beyond that, it's still it's a true statement.
Yeah, just do the
Yeah.
next right thing, whatever that is, and then don't worry about the rest. Let God handle that.
Yeah. I was gonna say the same thing, like give that long runway, but there's a reality that they might say, that's sweet, you're out in a month. And if they do that, ask for severance and then get out of there.
And if they do that, that was confirmation that that is not the kind of culture you want to be part of.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. The one last thing, obviously, and there's probably wisdom in this. You didn't share what the conflict was, but understand that conflict that you're experiencing might be at other churches too. Does that make sense? Like, I left the church and I was like, oh, I don't like the fact that this lead pastor is trying to control the entire church and surround himself with a bunch of yes man elders. And then I went to another church of a senior pastor who controlled everything and surrounded himself with a bunch of yes men pastors. And the only difference is that the other church stopped it. You know what I'm saying? The elders didn't allow themselves to be yes men. And so those conflicts that you find yourself in may be in churches that you might be stepping into when you go to the next one. But one key thing that you should take from this, as Andrew said, as we're all saying, right now, go to chemistrystaffing.com and look up Matt Steen, tell him Practically Pastoring sent you, and maybe we get a commission check because we've sent 30 pastors over there. Matt Steen is a rock star. He will gladly
It's
help
definitely
you.
worth having a conversation with someone whose ministry is connecting pastors to the right churches.
I was in a church, as y'all know, and I took my stuff to Matt Steen, and he nailed my timeline within like 2 months.
Wow.
So we're not doing this just as like a funny gag. It is good and it is wise, and I think it is holy to know people who understand this complex stuff. And by him kind of giving me that rough timeline, I was able to start positioning my own life. So when I left the church that I was in, it was very good for our family. It could have been different, but it was good. And thank you, Matt, if you're listening.
And this is for everybody. When you're looking for a church position and you use an organization like Chemistry Staffing, it costs you nothing. The way these organizations make money is the church that's hiring pays, I think it's like a monthly fee or a one-time fee to the organization to hire that person. So it costs you nothing, but you also benefit from this experience. You get to go through the process of interviewing. You get through the process of having someone else look at your resume. They might even have you do some sort of personality tests or some surveys, like theological surveys and stuff like that. And it will better you as a candidate and as a pastor because of that. So there was a time where I went through a similar organization to look for a job when I was leaving Arkansas before I went to Milwaukee. And I ended up finding my job in Milwaukee on churchstaffing.com. But because I put my name in the hat of that organization, I got to interview with 2 churches. And I learned a lot about my resume. I learned a lot about how I interview. I learned a lot about that because that was the first time I was interviewing with churches that weren't like super small churches. And I was like, oh, like, this is where I need to improve on. And that organization gave me feedback. They would say like, hey, when you interviewed, they said this about you. You seemed wounded by this. You seemed insecure about that, or whatever the case may be. And then when I found Epikos on churchstaffing.com and I interviewed, like I was able to interview better. And so anyways, it doesn't hurt to go through the process.
One caveat to that. If you're on church staffing or whatever job site, and you see that a church is being represented by Vanderbloemen Chemistry, whatever, Shepherd staff, what you want to do is reach out to that organization and send the organization your resume,
not the church,
not in reference to that job, because the church that was like the church where I was ordained, where I served for a couple of years. When we ended up here in Safety Harbor, we were kind of praying about what God had next for us, and there was a position at the church that we were at in Texas that we were like, ooh, is God calling us back to Texas? And I called the senior pastor, who's still a good friend of mine, and he said, ooh, Andrew, this is so awkward, but we signed a contract with Vanderbloemen that we would not conduct any of these conversations. It has to go through them. And so I was like, oh, well, okay. So I applied through Vanderbloemen, but then because I had applied to that position, Vanderbloemen could not send my resume to any other church that was looking until I was already a no for that position. And it ended up that they wanted someone who a little bit younger and a little bit cheaper. And so it worked, it didn't work out, but it was the guy at Vanderbloemen, I think his name is Danny, who I met with. It was awesome. He was a Disney person. So Vanderbloemen paid my mileage for me to drive over to Disney for the day. I was like, oh, okay, that's great. And he was just saying that it's tricky because sometimes they'll have a resume where someone is perfect for another job that they have, but because someone applied directly for the one specific job that they wanted, instead of sending their resume to the organization as a whole, that resume is held by that one job until it is a yes or a no for that one job. So send your resume to chemistry staffing, Slingshot Group, Vanderblumen, as a just kind of generic, here is my resume.
I'm a candidate.
I'm a candidate. These are the types of jobs that I'm looking for, not I want that job.
Think of it like when you're buying a house. You can go on Zillow and look at houses, but when you actually work with a real estate agent, they know about houses that you can't see on Zillow, and they can also tell you things about those houses that you can't tell from Zillow. It's the same thing. It's like chemistry staffing. You might apply for a church you see online, but they remember like, hey, actually, you're a better candidate for this. Also, if you go through the interview process and it doesn't work out, they'll ask you, would you like to continue to be in the system if other churches pop up? You say yes, and then they'll do that from there.